Welcome back. You're listening to the panel discussion, Adopting a Zero Trust Security Model, sponsored by Okta on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today are Bob Costello, the Chief Information Officer at the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency at the Homeland Security Department, Bo Hauser, the Chief Information Security Officer at the Census Bureau in the Commerce Department, Larry Kiger, the Executive Security Advisor of the Worldwide Public Sector at Amazon Web Services, and Sean Frazier, the Federal Chief Security Officer at Okta. Larry, we ended last segment, you talking about your front door, your foyer. How do you, if once you're in, where do you get to go? Do you get to the kitchen and find your special Girl Scout cookies that you hide in the cabinet up top like I do, so my kids don't find them? Talk a little bit about that concept a little bit more and how it works and why is it important? Not just the fact that you want to keep people out of the data or the applications, but how does that actually work?
Yeah, sure. So there, the easiest way to kind of describe this is, as you come into the cloud environment or into AWS. So basically, there is, policies that are going to be set up at the user level, right? So as you come in, I may not grant you access into, say, the cookies that are up in my, I also have them hidden in my cupboard as well. I'm not going to give you that access. I may let you know, or you may know that those cookies are there because of your own personal experience of hiding your own cookies. But in this case, we have a lot of folks know what AWS is, and they probably have been on the services, and they've seen a lot of the different services that we have to offer. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get access out of the gate, right? So once you get that initial authentication, as you come in through whatever you're going through, your SSO, or if you're coming in through Okta, the first thing that it's going to do is look for that policy. What do you have access to, right? And if it's set up to your, if you come in as a standard security user, right? So maybe you have access to KMS, Security Hub, or GuardDuty, and you're looking at those three areas, and those are the things that you're focusing on because you're security operations, right? You may not need to have access to creating a EC2 instance or a virtual compute instance, right? From that perspective, and so it would disallow you from being able to do that. You wouldn't even see that as a choice for being able to get on there and do things, right? So really kind of controlling where you're going to have access really starts at kind of having an idea of where the tools are going to exist, right, within your own environment. So to take it back to a step of a hybrid environment, because I know, Jason, you were talking a little bit about customers having hybrid environments. I can tell you that I have dealt with a few customers up in Canada and Israel, right? Even Israel. I know I'm America's, but essentially we do. I do work with some of the CISA type orgs within Israel as well, and one of the things that they said was, look, we have a multi-cloud environment, and we're not 100% sure how we're going to be able to even get the information that we need, from that perspective. So just having, going back to that example, it's all about like, well, what permissions are you going to need? What types of data are you going to have to access? Where is that data going to go? Before you start doing the analysis. And there's a lot of different moving pieces, but this all comes back down to identity and access management, as into, are we, since we're talking machine to machine, how are we going to install those certificates or get those, set up those, specific IAM principles to be able to go out and do something like that. I think that's a really good example that I could tell you from an identity and access management perspective that, hey, look, you really need to lock down the controls, right? Because you don't want everybody having access into those, particular files. And because it's coming in from multiple sources, either from a data center or other cloud services, you want to make sure that that's controlled, and that goes on to the microsegmentation, but I will stop there and allow my other colleagues to talk about maybe some of the things that they've seen.
I think one of the challenges that I'm always dealing with continuously, and it's kind of one of the hardest challenges, and I always want to say, let's start with the hard stuff, privileged access management. That has been something that we continue to see as a problem at CISA. How are we monitoring our privileged users? How are we auditing privileged users? And that's something that we're attacking really hard here. Often it is different than the standard user base, and often you can imagine being at the best tech agency in government. I have a lot of people that need escalated privileges at times. So that's something that I'm working really hard on right now. How do I, temporarily escalate privileges? How am I auditing that? How am I going through that? We learned, very quickly, we never want an account compromised. When certain accounts are compromised, it is very difficult to recover from those events in certain environments. SolarWinds, I think, was something that taught us. Well, we've known for years, but when we run into these situations where the keys to the kingdom or those privileged accounts are compromised, that's something that is very difficult to recover from. I think the other thing, and I've used a lot of different services. Ease of use is very important as well. When users have to jump through 4 hoops to get access to something to prove who they are, that doesn't work. Really well. They get aggravated. They'll find workarounds. They get someone else to get the data for them. We don't want those situations. So I'm really looking to partner with solutions that kind of ease the burden as we're proofing people against the policies. And I think one of the other challenges that many of us face is the pool of senior engineers that do this work is not as large as it should be. So I think education needs to be really improved out there. I think this is a growing field, identity and access management. Often we're competing for the same senior level people, and that's been a challenge. I think across government and I maybe private sector as well. It's wonderful that we have extremely low unemployment numbers in the country right now, but this is difficult work. The people that are the most experienced are very high in demand, and I think it's something that we all need to kind of work on, public and private sector, on educating more people that this is a great field to be in IT.
So I think Bob brings up a great point that is often overlooked in all this, which is user experience, right? I mean, we all, as security practitioners, we tend to think about protecting things and wrapping bubbles around things and not think about so much about what the user experience implications of those are. And I think this is actually, for me, an opportunity for Zero Trust to do what it was kind of designed to do. So Zero Trust has all these constructs of kind of least privilege, deny by default, which are all the protection things that we want. But it also kind of marries up to this new notion of the evolution of identity, which is, well, I can use like a new standard like FIDO2 or WebAuthn, which is much more performant, much better user experience. I can tie that in to my first pillar of identity and Zero Trust and get the best bang for the buck and get user experience in the bargain. So then I get all the security things that I really need, and I get the good user experience. And again, to Bob's point, privileged user access is important because these are the most technical people. They need escalated privileges, access to the most sensitive things. So we need the user experience for them to be just as seamless, meaning that it's all protected, using whether it's ephemeral keying technology where they can kind of just log in and magically get access to what they need to unless, some kind of context changes and we want to remove that access. But don't provide the friction to them, provide the friction to the attackers.
Yeah, that's well said. And I'll kind of continue the thread. This is Bo. And we have all personas at Census, and so we're working through this analysis currently. We obviously deal heavily with the general public, whether that's something like the 2020 census, which is every household, or the upcoming 2022 economic census that we're doing, where we work directly with the business community. We have every persona to sort of think about as we move into more of a zero trust approach. And so we're exploring services like login.gov on the federal side to do exactly that, to sort of meet those users where they are, whether it's the business community, the general population, or a federal partner, meet them where they are. If they already have a login.gov account, or if they have an Okta account or ID.me, we want to be able to leverage those services with our services, right? So we're trying to work that into our redesign. For our internal users, Bob's point is very well taken from a privileged user standpoint. And to me, the question I ask is, how do we dial up the rigor if this is a privileged user, right? With the general population, obviously you can't require a specific device. But for a privileged user, I can absolutely require a specific device, right? And I can maintain the awareness of the device that they're using. And in that scenario, hopefully get to the point where even if they lose their credential, their user credential, they still can't get in because the attacker's not on the right device, right? So that's the real payoff that is offered through Zero Trust. And so we're working through that here at Census too. But yeah, excellent dialogue. This is great.
Yeah, and I love that, all the things that Bo talked about are all open standards-based capabilities, right? So the great thing about living in the identity space today is we're all building these things to open standards. So whether it's login.gov or us at Okta, we can all work together. We have lots of examples in the public sector where we're teaming up and working together to provide services to the citizen-facing services as well as the enterprise services and kind of seamlessly bridging the gap between all those use cases.
And I know our friend Jeremy Grant will be very excited that you mentioned FIDO too as well. So I'll throw a plug for Jeremy out there.
I did it just for the Godfather identity.
Exactly, because
yes.
he may be watching. Oh, great! Now his head's even bigger. I want to go back to something that Larry started down that path on, because I think this is the other piece of this discussion is the microsegmentation. Because again, if I get into Larry's foyer, this microsegmentation can also stop me from getting into his kitchen. So Larry, maybe start with you on the microsegmentation piece, because I know that's where you wanted to go. First of all, let's just briefly give me 30 seconds or less of what is microsegmentation, just in case the audience is unfamiliar. And then two, how do you apply it using identity and access management?
Yeah, sure. So microsegmentation can be both physical and logical, and typically what we see is more on the logical side these days. Where we're actually controlling, maybe subnets, specific subnets, and where these micro subnets and what types of infrastructure or data is actually stored in these types of microsegments. So I think that these are the areas where we're actually, really kind of trying to push the boundary on, especially here at AWS, right? So, guys, correct me if I'm wrong. Did I miss anything in terms of, what you guys believe? I'm seeing a lot of shaking heads. So I would say back to you, Jason. On maybe following up.
All right, very good. So I think the key piece here is that it goes back to, I think, something that Bo and Bob talked about, which is this idea of if it's more than just roles and responsibilities, it's how much access do you have to this microsegment based on this set of attributes. Bo, is that something that you all started to build in, that microsegmentation piece, to some of this modernization efforts?
Yeah, and there's key considerations when you think about microsegmentation. The tendency initially is to use a compliance-based approach where you set up specific criteria for the access to that segment, right? And that works, but it's not dynamic, right? It's much more secure to take a different approach where it's more ephemeral, right? And where you have dynamic policies associated with microsegmentation. So I know it's a little probably in the weeds, but going into that conversation, you have to understand if you're going to use a compliance base where you set up the criteria, or if you're going to use a dynamic approach or a mixture of both, right? But when you use a compliance model, it's more static, right? And that's not good if there's a new sort of attack source that's coming at you. It's much, much better to be able to say, we block all attack sources based on this threat intel feed versus that sort of static configuration approach to microsegmentation. So we're wrestling with how to do this, because one way is simpler but less effective. The other is more sophisticated but more complex, right? So a lot of trade-offs in that very simple topic that you mentioned.
And just real quick before someone jumps in, I just want to, so in some cases, microsegmentation, you may take that compliance approach, right? And in some cases, you may take the more complex approach. Is that also part of this analysis?
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably more of a maturity type of a question, right? Initially, you might take a compliance approach because you can sort of set it and forget it and then adjust as needed on a periodic basis. But as you get more and more mature, that should be very dynamic, right? So, yes.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's one of the most important things about thinking about microsegmentation in a zero trust model. It's that least privilege model, denied by default. So by default, I don't have access to anything, but I can spin that up dynamically, as Bo points out, when I need it, and then tear it down when I'm done. And it's easier said than done because the technology is just kind of coming out where we're starting to figure this stuff out. And to me, I don't look at this as a networking problem. I look at this as a data and application problem. And it kind of happens at the application layer.
Let me just kind of jump in on top of that, because I think there's a couple of things that were really interesting, that both Bo shared and my buddy from Okta. And I think that there's a couple of different things that too. When I'm looking at microsegmentation, right? I'm looking at, do I need to build a subnet within a VPC, right? VPC, virtual private cloud, right? So when somebody comes into AWS, that's basically where you're going to build your infrastructure, is within that VPC. So now once I've done that, I need to know exactly what type of data am I going to put in there, or am I going to take this hard approach that Bo was talking about, where I need to actually go and put some more complex routing and things of that nature in there, from actually building a separate VPC, or maybe I'm looking at different OUs from that model. As we're looking at like AWS organizations, and basically providing that top-down approach, right, from a master payer down to maybe sub payers that are out there, right, or sub accounts that sit up underneath that master payer. So these are areas where microsegmentation and the way that we are actually looking at it here at AWS are a little bit different than kind of your traditional approach, but kind of in the same sense, right? It's the same story, right? So just like Bo, whenever I'm recommending an architecture or something like that to one of the federal FedCiv companies or organizations, or I'm talking to Okta or whomever, right, or to a partner organization, I'm talking about what is it that we're trying to do. Do we need to go with this more complex approach where we're really taking a look at, not just this microsegmentation aspect of it, but we're also adding things in like who can access and where can they access these microsegments, and then what type of controls are we going to put into from a compliance perspective, maybe even to really kind of limit down what type of data we're allowed to store on that, and we're talking FedRAMP at this point, right? So FedRAMP high, moderate, or low. We can look at that from an OU perspective, right?
We're just about to come up on break, so let me just jump in. Larry, real quick, are you getting a lot of requests from your clients, AWS federal clients, for microsegmentation, or is it just kind of they're talking about it, but they're not quite there yet? Just real quick.
Yeah, no, of course. I just got finished with a conversation with one of our partners on Monday that was, a large DoD provider, and they specifically were talking about how do I separate, my high, my high FedRAMP from my, maybe even IL5 or IL6 from a DoD perspective, right? How do I do that? And then still be able to support my my own internal customers from a CISO or CIO perspective, CTO perspective, and give them access to being able to access things at the moderate or low level, right? So how are we going to handle that? And of course, that really is all about microsegmentation at that point. And whether you support it with OU or not, that's completely, there.
All right. Plenty more to dig out. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we can continue our conversation. You're listening to the panel discussion, Adopting a Zero Trust Security Model, sponsored by Okta on Federal News Network.